In this video, I'm going to talk about how shaken baby syndrome, affected daily life for me and for my daughter. And I had an older daughter at the time, and, who was healthy, and, it was just us three in the home. I was a single mom at the time. So just talking about daily life, my daughter was diagnosed with seizures. She was blind after being shaken. She could not do any kind of voluntary movements. She had gastroparesis. She was diagnosed with cerebral palsy, and she, basically couldn't do anything. And so I was her full-time caregiver whenever we didn't have nursing care. So we had nursing care on and off, and then she would be in and out of the hospital on and off. And so that left me with being her, primary caregiver for most of the time. And daily life when we were at home would be, she had to have, I think it was probably about 10 medications every single day, and then multiple times a day. So I think the longest time span in between medications was like 6 hours. So I would give her last dose the night before, and then 6 hours later would have to be up to give it to her again. So you can imagine how, I never would have imagined this in a caregiver's life like this, but every single day I would have to stay up to that certain time to give her medication, and then I would go to bed and then get back up with her throughout the night, because she would cry sometimes and she would need, different things throughout the night. And then I would get back up after that 6 hours, give her medications, let the nurse come in, or if there was no nurse that day, would give her medications, and then start her daily care, which would be, rotating her back and forth so she didn't get bed sores, making her formula that she had to have. So she was on a 24-hour, I think she might have had an hour or two break every day, but 24-hour feeds, which went through a J tube. So she had to have a GJ tube is what it's called. So we would have to vent any gases from her stomach through the G tube, and then all the feeds and medications and everything would go directly into her stomach through the J tube, into her intestines, and bypass the stomach, because gastroparesis caused her to not be able to have anything on her stomach. Okay, and so mostly just keeping an eye on her throughout the day to make sure that she was being turned back and forth, had her medications on time, didn't have any, things going on. And sometimes there would be days where she was just inconsolable, I guess is the word, and she would cry and cry and cry. And those were very stressful days for me. If I didn't have a nurse, it would be just me there with her, and it was very difficult to get through those days. And I would call people for help if I had that option, and so that's kind of the daily life. And honestly, in the morning times when I would go in there, if I fell asleep for a few hours, I would go in there in the morning and be like, is she still breathing? Is she still, has she passed away? Because her prognosis was that she could just pass away at any time, and the doctors didn't know exactly what would happen for her. And so that she could literally just stop breathing and be gone. And so, I look back now and think of that mental stress that had to have caused me, and I didn't realize it in the moment. But I think I am just so thankful now that I don't have to get up every morning and go check on my daughter and be like, is she still breathing? Please let her still be breathing. And that's a very sad thing to think about, but it's just it's a reality of what people have to go through whenever their child is experience, shaken baby syndrome or something, an injury. And so I would have to kind of work all of that around my other daughter. So she was anywhere from the ranges of 3 to 5 while Christa was still alive. And so she would be in daycare and I think kindergarten before. Yeah. So I somehow still had to manage getting her back and forth to daycare and school and taking care of her also. And so that was very stressful at times. Thankfully I did have some help, but my daughter Christa was very difficult to get in and out of our vehicle, and she really just hated it. So she had a dislocated hip that could not be fixed because of her age and the growth that she could have and things like that. And the dislocation came from what they call storming after she was shaken, and she was just pulling, like her body would be toned and it would pull on that hip, and it eventually dislocated it, but over time. So it wasn't like just like a snap where it dislocated, but because of that, it made it extremely, uncomfortable for her to do anything except lay in her bed. And I would sometimes carry her or hold her, and she was okay, but a lot of the times she was uncomfortable because of that. So you can imagine taking my other daughter to school and having to get her in and out of the car 2 times a day and stuff was very difficult. But it was part of the daily life that I'm trying to just, share with you about. Let me think of what else. Just going through the lack of sleep. I didn't get a lot of sleep because of her being awake and then having to check on her. I would have some anxiety about leaving her in her bedroom. There wasn't any really medical equipment that she could have to like keep track of her heart rate and things like that, and insurance wouldn't provide that for us because she didn't have oxygen. So at the time, it was just left up to me to go in her room and check on her. And a lot of the time she didn't sleep for longer than a few hours at a time. So she might fall asleep, an hour later be awake. And when she was awake, a lot of the time she was crying if no one was there, because even though the doctor said she didn't really have any brain function, she could feel when people were around, and she wanted someone around all the time, and I don't blame her for that. But so there were a lot of good moments too. I got to watch my older daughter be selfless and learn that characteristic through helping take care of her and sharing me with her and things like that. And I got to learn how to be selfless as well by having to fully rely on God to help me get through those days, because I look back now and nothing would have helped except God's strength, God's perseverance, His abilities, not my abilities, Him working through me, not me relying on myself. If I had relied on my own strength, I would have given up, because I did have the option of putting her in a nursing home at the age of 2 and 3 years old. And that I refused to do that. I was not going to do that. I had to do whatever it took, I knew, to make sure that I could provide for my children, myself, and still take care of her. And so that's what I did. I worked part-time to full-time job also. And so, daily life was very difficult during that time, but it was also this beautiful time of just transforming me into this, new woman who understood things I never would have understood without the situation, and who could persevere. And like, I never would have realized how much I could persevere through, and the strength, and how much God would actually do and show up for, us and our family. And it gave me a new belief in God and His abilities. And it gave me a new understanding of doing things out of God's strength, not our own strength. Because if we try to do things out of our strength, we will fail. And leaning on Him, makes a lot more sense than it does to lean on yourself and to just depend on yourself all the time. Depend on God and allow Him to help you get through it. So that's basically what daily life was like. And, daily life has changed a lot since she passed away. But I will always think back to those times and how, I am thankful to not have to live that way, but I would go back to it in a heartbeat. If she was still here, I would have done it the rest of my life. But if you want to learn more about our story, you can find it in our book, Going Through Trials with God, 7 Lessons Learned Through Shaken Baby Syndrome. It's on Amazon and Audible. And I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you on the next one.